Not again.
Hello? Again?
Again.
Once again.
Hello, welcome to the Exploding Appendix podcast. This is Defending Arts and Culture in Brighton, episode 5. We are talking to Simon James.
Yeah, Simon James. And I don't know how many people actually got to see the exhibition. And I thought it was really, really good. And I thought that it raised a lot of really interesting questions about not just about class generally or about the archaeological site in Brighton, but also about sort of Brighton itself and Whitehawk and the city. So I thought it was a really great, musically, like really interesting project in ways in which it engaged with the community in Brighton and especially in Whitehawk. Yeah, lots of interesting things going on, but we'll get into some of that in a bit. So yeah, the exhibition, we will talk a little bit more about the exhibition in a minute. So it was a project so in Whitehawk, there had been a archaeological site. There's a kind of ancient archaeological site in Whitehawk. What Simon did is he went into Whitehawk. The original archaeological excavation was really about the sound-based one. So it was working out what was underground through this kind of process of sound, which we will talk about in a minute. What was done was with this project was to actually engage with young people to create a kind of sound installation piece, which explored Whitehawk as an area. It was in sort of in partnership with Class Divide?
Yeah.
So Class Divide is a podcast. It's about educational inequalities in Whitehawk and around the educational system in Whitehawk. So we'll get into some of this in a second. So I know that your twin brother, Curtis, is more sort of directly involved with like Class Divide as both a podcast and as an educational campaign. But I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about what Class Divide is and what they are doing.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, Dean. Thanks for coming. So I work with my brother Curtis on parts of the Class Divide project, but I'm not directly connected to the campaigning part of it. That's definitely something that is his thing. But Class Divide is a grassroots campaign group fighting for education equality in Brighton and Hove. And there are some shocking stats around attainment levels around people that face in areas like Whitehawk and the rest of the city. There's some effort being made to try and readjust that or to balance that out. It's quite contentious.
Certainly there's some policy changes that the council are trying to bring about, and Class Divide have been partly involved in that, but it's a council thing. Anyway, I don't want to say too much about it because it's not my area of expertise. I support the campaign. I'm not here as a spokesperson for Class Divide. And in fact, I'm quite disappointed in the way that council have managed the process around these new proposals for changing the catchment areas, which cause quite a lot of the divide and unfairness in Brighton. So anyway, but I did help produce the podcast, and the Neolithic Cannibals project came off the back of that, like the idea of how can we help people listen to an area that's not really heard or not listened to.
So you grew up and went to school in Whitehawk. What was that like, and how did that experience sort of inform the way you approached Neolithic Cannibals?
What was it like growing up in Whitehawk? That's a question that comes up a lot, and it's funny because when I think about the people that ask me that question, it's often with a sort of kind of like amazement that I grew up there. What's it like?
Yeah.
But it must have been really bad, like I'm a zoo animal or something. So I'm quite careful in the way that I talk about my experiences of growing up in Whitehawk. School was difficult. I wasn't very good academically. There was definitely, bearing in mind this is 30 years ago, more than that. Some of my memories are hazy. There's definitely a feeling of like being given up on at an early age and not really feeling like you had the support, and that leading to sort of bad behavior. Like there was an expectation that we weren't going to do very well. So you find your own way to exist in that system, and that can often be messing around, finding ways to be seen and heard that maybe aren't, that don't fit in academically and don't help with that academic side of things. But there are also some real positives about school. and that directly connect to what we're talking about tonight. And there are two things. One is that both me and Curtis found our way into the theatre that the school had. And one of my main memories of that is the lighting box, this funny little blue box that had faders on it. And it was connected to some lights that were up on the ceiling. And I wouldn't have understood this at the time, but now when I look back at that, I see how that ability to play with space and transform something and experiment in a way, even though it was very simple, just changing the lighting of a space, that was important. That was an important moment. And we would get out of our usual lessons to go and be involved in drama productions, doing the lighting and the sound. So we found an escape from the academic that didn't feel natural for us, and found our way into some creative worlds that were very fulfilling.
Because there was another thing, I think, in the podcast where that you were introduced to certain musicals.
Yeah, so I didn't study music at school. At the time, I wasn't happy about it. I wanted to study music at school, but there wasn't enough room, apparently. So I ended up doing a course about parenting, which at the time, as a teenage boy in the 90s, or maybe it was the 80s, it was really unusual. I was the only boy in the class. And at the time, it felt alien. Like, what am I doing in here? Which obviously now I look back and go, no, of course, it was an amazing thing to be doing. All boys should be doing those lessons. So I did that. So I didn't get to study music, but somehow, and I don't really know how this happened, there was a new music teacher came in, and I discovered that he had some synthesizers, electronic instruments, in a side room of the music room. And he would let me go in and play with these at lunchtime. So I'd be playing on this synthesizer, and I can remember, in fact, I bought the synthesizer off him after I left school. It had like sound effects on it, like helicopters and storms. And those sounds were much more interesting to me than any of the what would be considered musical sounds like piano or flute or whatever. I was interested in these strange soundscapes that I could create. It felt really exciting. Like this is magic. And so through that connection with that music teacher, he also brought in some musicians that brought in samplers, turntables and drum machines. And at this time, that was gear that was kind of mythical. You might see it on top of the pops on a Thursday evening, but the chance to get to play with that stuff was almost like unbelievable. But we had 2 days of playing with this equipment, and then it culminated in a concert that had some rappers that were quite famous at the time at our community centre. And I think even though it might not have been clear in that moment that, okay, this is definitely what I'm going to do, it planted this seed of this is interesting and exciting. And that same music teacher, after we left school, I'm sorry I say we a lot because I'm a twin, and we did a lot of stuff at the same time. And when we left school with no qualifications, that music teacher helped us apply for a Prince's Trust grant. And we had to do funny things, like we had to go back to the school and do a presentation. And I can only imagine how bad that was. I'm only just feeling comfortable with public speaking now, but as a 17-year-old, imagine what it must have been like. Anyway, we had to go and do a presentation in school to help us kind of apply for this funding. And we were both working in a plastics factory at the time, sort of cutting bits for JCBs. And I used to use this big machine that was it looks like a monster. It had this hole with these curtains, and you had to force all the bits of unwanted plastic in, and it would cut them all up into tiny shards. There was no safety or anything like that. We were working there, and we were waiting to find out this news about this money. I think we were involved, I'll talk about Daniel a bit later, but we were already involved in some radio, we were DJing a little bit. And I remember getting a bus every day and listening to techno music and being, I would really want to make this, being amazed and kind of just so excited about the possibility that I might be able to make this music one day. And then one day we got a phone call at the factory saying we got this grant. And it's so funny because I think we both thought, we've made it. And I think we made this big thing about leaving. We're never coming back. This is it now. We're off to get famous and make money out of making music. And of course, it didn't quite work out like that. But it was a very important, pivotal moment for us to have that support from that teacher, who I know I've since learned, he's dead sadly now, but I've since learned that he did that for quite a lot of young people. He was really supportive. So that, yeah, and that happened around the same time that Daniel, who is also very important to mine and Curtis's story, gave us the opportunity to work in radio. Daniel set up some early radio, like independent radio stations, festival radio. Am I jumping ahead?
No, that's fine.
So anyway, yeah, we were kind of already DJing a little bit, working in radio on voluntary level, and we were in that world. Yeah, opened up lots of possibilities for us.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
It's the first time I've heard. I just think it's just very intriguing, and I don't know, it's worrying for me hearing you talk about not about words and texts, but about landscapes, and it's the lighting landscape and the sand. You use the word landscape for the sand because of the lighting different spaces, and obviously the landscape of the factory environment. Really.
Yeah, and it's worth saying as well that at the time, both me and Curtis, we had quite difficult stuff going on in our family. My mum had severe mental health issues. You know, people often talk about music being an escape, but it really was for us. You know, we were happy to go and spend all our time working in Daniel's radio station to give us that escape, to help us find our way into this creative world. The music, yeah, it was really important actually. And I should also say that just because it's important to sort of set out the landscape back then, we were very lucky in that we could sign on. There was a social security system that could support young people that didn't want to go to college or go to school. We weren't lazy. We weren't sitting around playing computer games. We were trying to work out what we wanted to do as musicians. And now that's impossible. Young people don't have that support.
So Brighton is often seen as a very sort of progressive, creative, inclusive city. To what extent does the sort of class divide or educational disparities sort of challenge that perception?
Well, I think actually it follows on from what I was just describing, that we're really lucky to live in Brighton because it is a great creative place with lots of amazing people doing fun and exciting projects. But if you grow up somewhere like Whitehawk, you might as well be a million miles away because you don't see it. You've got no access to it. It's quite unlikely that your parents will be or would have access to the great artwork that's going on in Brighton, and so you won't see it. None of your friends are doing it. No one you know is part of that world. So it's quite hard to find it, and I don't think that's spoken about enough. I've been lucky enough to work in the creative areas for most of my life, and I rarely meet someone from my background, and that's bad. That's not good, is it? It's not even about the fact that it's unfair. More importantly, we're missing out on some interesting stories. And it unfortunately perpetuates the cycle of sort of misunderstanding because those stories are never told, you know, from those perspectives. You know, I love Brighton. I don't want to bash it. It's given me lots of opportunities. I work with lots of amazing people across all, you know, different classes, for want of a better way of describing it. And lots of people have given me opportunities. But it's very tough if you're from an area like Whitehall to get into it.
Do you think is there a kind of way of resolving that? Is it just bringing projects up?
I think this isn't my idea, but I read someone suggested potentially if, say you're in a position of some privilege or you maybe work in the creative world or the arts world and you're able to give a family member or a friend an opportunity like work experience or a work placement, that you have to match that placement for someone that wouldn't normally have that opportunity. So that there's an understanding that it's kind of, there's a disparity there, that you're benefiting from the privileges of your family and your background, and that could be shared out a little bit to break that cycle and give some other people some space.
Are there any outreach programs for schools, like in Brighton, like from creative people that might have the resource to do that?
Yeah, I'd love to do some
work with the schools. They encourage kids the same way you were inspired.
I don't know, maybe there are some. I would love to run some things like that, but someone would have to give me some money to do it. And I wanted to do more after Neolithic Cannibals, but the reality of trying to get funding for this work is tricky.
Overall, like to see talking about people just having social security to be able to live that life. But over your kind of career and growing up and doing that stuff and being from that background, Do you think that just the funding situation is just much worse now? How do you see that? Do you see like those opportunities as being much more limited than they were like 20, 30 years ago?
I'm not an expert on funding. I've funded my own projects by doing commercial work.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy the funding game, whatever you call it, and I tend not to get involved in it. It takes up too much time. I'd rather be making work. But it's different. I'm in a really difficult situation right now. I have no commercial work. I spent all of last year focusing on Neolithic Cannibals and getting involved in lots of other really lovely art projects. But arts projects don't pay the bills. And, what's the Arts Council going rate? 200 or 250 maximum. That's not enough really to survive on. It's not right. But then there's still a problem, isn't there? Because for all the great outreach, where are the curators? Where are the gallery people that are running galleries that grew up in Whitehawk? Because if they're not there, they don't exist. So that outreach is good. It's not changing the system. It's not making enough change. It's not enough just to go into an area and say, "Oh, here's your art from."
And is that partly a problem with the festival? Very singular focus on that, not really going into the festival, things happening for that moment in time. But then
they get a lot of money, don't they?
And I think we were told when we were applying for Arts Council funding for Neolithic Cannibals, which we didn't get, that Brighton's oversubscribed. It gets too much funding from the Arts Council. And we said, well, Whitehawk doesn't, but they're not interested in that.
Because look at the town, sort of talking about the town.
Yeah.
There was a huge amount of, I thought, serious effort, and it was trying to get every single year 6 in Eastbourne in this wasn't, kids owned it, and they often kind of did it after hours so that kids feel relaxed there and so on. It's just like such a drop in the ocean, and they said, well, the children in the coast never even used the beach. It's all going to be solved with one term prize initiative.
And I'm certainly not an expert. I've done this project. I don't claim to be an expert in archaeology, class, arts, or anything. I can talk about my experience, but I'd be careful about that, saying that thing about kids that have never been to the beach. I don't know if it's true. I think it's a bit of a myth.
Yeah.
I often hear people say that. It comes up quite a lot. I don't think that's true.
But you're quite right, it is a generalisation.
Yeah. But I don't want to spend all evening bashing them.
I think there's some great things going on in Brighton. In terms of infrastructure, I think even just in the centre of Brighton there's an infrastructure problem. How it all comes together, because there's lots of brilliantly creative people living in Brighton. It's how does that then go somewhere else? Go beyond that?
It's very hard. I think a lot of the struggle is recruitment as well. And if you're not in an area like Whitehawk, it's quite hard to work in. And I don't live there now, but I happen to know enough people, and we have connections with the crew club, the community centre there, and so that's how we managed to work with the community in that way.
Could you tell us a bit about your sound art practice? What it is and how it's developed?
I love that question. Thank you. I would say that listening is the main thing I'm doing right now, which sounds so simplistic and it's kind of thing, but listening is at the heart of everything I do. And when I look back at the kind of work that I've done, I think that probably is a common thread that's run through it. It's just become more obvious now. So I work with sound. I've made music at times, and I started off making music, but I've always been interested in, and actually this was partly necessity, because the first bit of equipment we had to make music was a sampler. And a sampler, you have to feed it with sounds, which means you have to find sounds. So I've always worked with what I sometimes call found sounds or field recordings. Because I've worked in radio as well alongside making music, working with Daniel, who gave me the opportunity, I kind of even at the time thought, this is crazy. Daniel let me loose on some radio productions, drama and spoken word things. I've also worked in creating imaginary sound spaces for dramas and readings. So I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about how do I create this, maybe it's a fantastical, realistic space using sounds. I've always been playing with sound worlds. Sometimes sound worlds that I wanted to escape into, sometimes sound worlds that are for drama, BBC drama or features and things like that. And it's only really recently that I suppose, started to think less about the aesthetics of that. Just, oh, this is a cool sound. Oh, great, that's good. And more about what sounds mean to me and the power of sounds and the power of listening. And certainly with Neolithic Cannibals, I think I was able to bring a lot of things that I'd started to think about together around what might listening mean to a community? What might listening mean around my background and telling my story? I think something that I hear a lot about people from working class backgrounds is a kind of lack of self-worth and a feeling like their voice isn't valid, or, certainly for myself, I've spent most of my life feeling like I'm stupid and not clever enough. And that's meant that I probably haven't done the things that I could have done. I haven't made the radio programs using my voice, telling my story, and felt confident in that. And I'm starting to do that now. And Neolithic Cannibals was, I suppose, the first public step in doing that. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really infused by it. I feel like it's kind of been held back for so long, and now I'm really excited about what can I do with sound and listening. I think that feels right.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Sorry, can I ask just before, I want to hear more about your arc, as it were, but in terms of like Neolithic Cannibals, I was just wondering whether things that the kids brought to it that surprised you, or was there a continuity?
When I was preparing the workshops for Neolithic Cannibals, there were some voices of concern around, they're not going to get this. You're trying to talk about like deep listening and field recording and experimental sound things. And I was sometimes swayed by that and worried about it. I was pleasantly surprised that the kids were completely open to it. When I set them loose with the field recorders, they just went and found such amazing sounds. And of course they're playing. And that was what it was about. And I was playing with them. We were all playing together. And I think, so that surprised me, although I shouldn't have done. I think I was surprised by the level of chaos. I talked about this before. I knew it would be chaotic. And I remember writing right at the start, welcome the chaos. So I sort of knew I wouldn't be able to resist it or fight it. When you place a table of electronic instruments in front of a group of young teenagers, the first thing they do, sorry, for the people not here in person, there is a dog looking at me. What they do is they turn every knob all the way to the right. So what that means, if you're picking up a synthesizer, that's very high pitch and very loud. So a lot of the time was spent living with that, sitting with that, listening to it, letting them work their stuff out, and then gently saying, what if we just turn those down this way a little bit? Or what if we leave a bit of space in between? But yeah, the level of chaos was pretty shocking.
Because you can often get this, I think it relates both to children and in class, that people will often think, oh, someone's not going to get this. And I think that there is just this sense in pushing through, and actually people do get things.
Yeah.
Even things that we might think of like complex or weird.
Yeah.
People often, given the opportunity, will actually be able to engage with it.
Sorry, I keep forgetting. We've got some slides, haven't we? Could you go on to number 2? Because then you'll be able to see some of what we're talking about. It will play. It's got some. It's mainly stills.
So I really love the title, Neolithic Cannibals. I think it's a clever and playful way of linking the archaeological site in Whitehawk with the way that some people tend to think about the working class community that lives there. Can you tell us a little bit about the ideas behind the project?
Yeah, I just got absolutely carried away, indulging myself in learning about archaeology and working out how I could take some of the aesthetics, some of the kind of the research and the things I was finding out about archaeology, and somehow use sound to represent them. And initially, in fact, that spot right there, that's where the Neolithic site is. This grass, where the camera is, that's where the site is. I was up there recording something for one of the podcast episodes. And if you actually look on this, can you see, get up, sorry, for people that aren't here, you won't be able to see this. This here is the shape of the Neolithic site that was put up on the hill. So I was up here one day with Curtis, and we were recording something for one of the podcasts, and he was doing this, talking about the Neolithic site and linking the history of it to the Whitehawk estate. And it dawned on me that this could be a really interesting sound project. And I started to dig a little bit deeper. Sorry, that's terrible. I looked, the first thing I found was some LiDAR scans. And I just loved the shape. There's these 4 concentric circles. You can only see one of them. There's really not much left that's visible anymore. There's these 4 concentric circles. And for me, that looked like it could be a graphic score. It could be something that could be transformed into music or sound. And at that point, Brighton Festival hadn't commissioned what we were doing. I was going to do a couple of workshops with the young people in Whitehawk, and we were going to make a podcast episode that was just experimental sound. And I thought, okay, this will be enough. I can just use this shape, and we can play with some synthesizers, and we'll just create some chaos and noise. And then when Brighton Festival got in touch, we were able to really expand the idea beyond just that simple thing. And I spent a lot of time at the Keep, great archive in Brighton, a lot of time at Brighton Museum. I went on a walk that was arranged by an archaeologist called John Sibley, and I chased him afterwards. I chased him and said, I've got this really, you're probably going to think it's a mad idea, but I want to make a sound project about this space. And he was really into it. He became my mentor. I just asked him loads of stupid questions about archaeology, and he really helped me. And then I found about this thing that just really sealed the deal for me. This is called a Bosing tool. So I'm researching Bosing, B-O-S-I-N-G. In fact, can you play clip 6? I'm researching this project. It's about sound and listening to the landscape, listening to the environment, working with young people, sounding the environment, actually using sounds to maybe bounce off the buildings in the estate or the valley walls. Like really coming up with imaginative ideas of how we can play with sound in the space. And then I find out that the Neolithic site itself was discovered, or not discovered, but the early mapping was done using sound. It blew my mind. Like, oh my God, this is meant to be. So this is an early geophysical tool. It is basically a piece of lead on the end of a broomstick. It's a sounding instrument. So what that means is you drop it on the ground and you listen to the sound that it makes. And in the case of this Neolithic site, if you get a hollow sound, it means that there's disturbed ground underneath there. And if you get a solid sound, it means it's undisturbed. So see that blue shape there? That's the shape of the Neolithic camp, represented in the gallery space. They were able to map out that space just using sound and listening. Just cool. I was just so amazed that sound was integral to the beginning of this story, or the beginning of the exploration of the site. And I was very lucky to work with an artist who made me this thing that sat in the gallery. And for me, this sat in the gallery as a symbol of deep listening. It was a physical representation of what I hoped people might bring to Whitehawk and areas like Whitehawk. Properly listen to those areas in ways they haven't been before. I know because I've lived it that you do feel invisible and unheard when you grow up somewhere like that. So yeah, that was a really lovely thing. And maybe we should listen. Should we listen to some? So this is a clip that will share some of the chaos of what's going on. And I might talk a bit.
Oh my god, the Emery Hoover!
Slay Queen. Slay Queen. This is the best sounds ever.
Those that didn't see it in the gallery, I should say, it sounded a lot better. We had 8 speakers surrounding it, so when you walked in, you could stand in the middle and be surrounded by the sounds. But because you asked specifically about the name Neolithic Cannibals, it's worth just pointing out another discovery I made whilst I was researching the project. I found a book, the main archaeologist that did the digs up on the hill was a guy called Cecil Kerwin. And I've read that apparently he used to turn up at digs in a Rolls Royce and all of his staff and helpers would turn up on bikes and stuff. But he wrote, he wrongly wrote about cannibals living up on Whitehawk Hill. He made some finds and he made this very quick judgment that cannibals were living up there. And it was reported in the local newspaper. And then he wrote about it in a book. And actually my argument wasn't whether there were cannibals or not. It was the language he used to describe the people that lived up there as filthy animals living in their own litter. And it reminded me of the kind of language that is often used to describe people that live in areas like Whitehawk. Really, that kind of othering that goes on. I certainly had feelings of feeling like dirty as a person growing up there. Like, I wasn't clean or there was something wrong with me from growing up there. So I know that. So anyway, I took that Neolithic, that idea of the cannibals and thought, well, it sounds a bit like a gang name or a band. It sounds a bit provocative. And I think it's a great name. The thing I'm proudest of the most about the project. Yeah,
it's a great name.
When were those digs going on?
1920, from around then, it's a different time. You want to use that saying.
What was it like for young people in Whitehawk for this project? This is a bit similar to your question, actually, but were there any surprises, and how might project inform the way we as an artists engage or with broader communities in Brighton?
It was lovely working with them. Mm-hmm. I couldn't help but see myself in some of them. Felt really like it was really important to me to support them and encourage them and give them the opportunity to do this. I always saw them as artists right from the start. Yeah, they may not have the experience that I had, but we were collaborators.
How were the groups chosen for you to have? How was that all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I ran some taster sessions. So I went to the crew club on a couple of nights and I just set up a table of equipment and made some noise and left the door open. And young people would come in and turn all the knobs all the way up. And some of them were with their parents, so we were able to sign them up. And that's really, and then we had good connections with some schools, Long Hill.
But you weren't just allocated classes, it was people, set for people who...
There were 8 young people that came to every session, and they came to every session. And in like the photo that you would have seen, there they are. There's only 1, 2, some of them missing there. Oh, was I surprised? And what was it like working with them? Yeah. We did the sessions after school on Tuesday evenings, and I learned a lot. I had all of these naive ideas about how it was all going to work. Like I was going to go along, set up this great equipment, and it would be amazing, and it would all just work. And I very quickly found out that having a table of random bits of equipment, it's quite hard to manage the teaching of and the support of when I'm on my own. And I understand why people would use a room full of iPads or laptops for that purpose and all using the same gear. But we got good results from experimenting with that, all the different kit. Like I said earlier, their ability to engage with quite new and unusual ideas. I think often, going into work with groups of young people to make music is quite common. And I think there is often an expectation, or there was an expectation in these sessions that, where's the keyboards? We're going to be making beats and things. And I completely admit to this. I didn't want to make beats. I didn't want them to make beats. There's enough of those projects, and they're great, and I think they're good. But I believe that there's a much wider world of sound to be explored. And I was quite excited to take that in and share that with them. Some people might look at that and go, oh, maybe that isn't the right approach, but it was what I wanted to do. But yeah, there were times when there was a keyboard in the room that was just part of the setup in the room. And often the young people would go to the keyboard and just start playing it. And I'd have to sort of stand and go, how do I deal with this? I don't want that. I don't want that in this space. And so the way that I dealt with that is I said, you can play that keyboard, but you have to turn it upside down so that you're not playing any of those things that you've learned in your music lessons. Just forget about what you know about what music is meant to be, and let's experiment and play. And that sort of worked. There were definitely moments where they were looking at me going, what are you talking about? What is going on here?
But in terms of upside down, you mean
like turn it so you're looking at it from the other side.
Oh, yeah.
So not upside down like that.
Yeah.
Just turning it around. Sorry, I didn't explain it really well. You're looking at it from the other side.
Yeah.
It just changes a bit about how you would approach it.
Yeah.
It was the only thing I could do apart from throw it out the door, which I wasn't going to do.
So does any piano?
No, it never made it in.
No.
But it was just a way of thinking about it and helping, maybe just trying to share what it was we were trying to achieve in the sessions. But we did, I'm so proud of the workshops we did. We did graphic scores. We did speaker and microphone feedback. These are all parts of the sound art world that if you're a sound artist or experimental musician, you understand all this stuff. But if you're an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old in Whitehawk, this is completely new. And I'm making some assumptions because, some people might have heard some of the stuff, but for the majority, it's completely unusual and different, but they all engage with it. In fact, the feedback, which I do have in fact, could you play? So this was the only time they were quiet. They were mesmerized by this process. So for those that don't know what feedback is, what I'm talking about feedback, know when that's the feedback that no one likes. Young people who created graphic scores. Graphic score. Maybe shapes. Sounds to shapes. Melodies. we had pizzas and sat and listened to their work. And it was really lovely. It was, of course, it was quite an emotional moment. And I think some of the young people often, they rarely share how into. Maybe if there are any teachers here or lecturers or blank face, you're like this or don't like it. And I think that I could tell that they liked it. Their parents, we couldn't have done it without the parents. They were so supportive of the project, and I think also that launch event, it was just lovely to see young people from Whitehawk in amongst the art world of Brighton Festival. They were just running around. They were outside shouting at cars going by. Just walking past that. Yeah. 14-year-olds managed to get beer from the bar. You can imagine the Lighthouse staff just running like, "You gotta get that beer off there." But it was just brilliant. It was like it's exactly what I wanted to happen, and I was really proud of them. Yeah. Pardon?
Especially the guy that got the beer.
Yeah. Well, I'm just drinking, but. Nor do I know whether they're particularly interested in archaeology. There are some weaknesses and some things that I wish we could have done differently in this project, and most of that's to do with money and not having enough time. So there was a disconnect between the workshops and what you hear in the gallery. I spent 5 days putting together. So across the 6 workshops, everything was recorded. Everything, even a microphone in the room recording what we were talking about, what was going on. Because right from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to have the ability to use everything. Everything could fit into this and would be okay. So yeah, the disconnect was, I wish that the young people could have been more involved in putting the final piece together. And I did get a sense of that during the launch event, that maybe some of the young people were listening to it going, "Oh, did we make this?" So, I wish that could have been different. And we would have needed extra workshops to do that, which weren't possible. If I was doing it again, we'd do that. Yeah, they were proud. There was a lot of laughter, and we're still in touch with them. I'm still in touch with their parents. I can see you. I just finished what I'm going to say. And the work has been entered for some awards, and I'm still pushing it. And in fact, I'm thinking about running some drop-in workshops over at the Crew Club. I just need to get some funding to do it. Just not even thinking about making a finished project for like Brighton Festival, but just workshop sessions for the sake of doing it, making some noise together.
You said that you found it very emotional, and it feels really emotional watching and listening, and it sounds like children find it emotional as well. What are those emotions, and what are the commonalities you think across all the different emotions?
I was actually really anxious because coming and talking about a project like this means I have to make myself vulnerable talking about my childhood and difficult things. That's okay. I've done this project. I've put myself in this space. It's not always easy. I'm not finding it necessarily easy at the moment. The emotions, there's some sadness personally for me, that it took me so long to be heard, because just as those young people are being heard, and it's not that I've made music, I've done stuff, I've had records out, I've made radio, but to be heard with my voice and my story, it's quite something. It's a new thing. So it's sometimes difficult to talk about. I can't speak for the emotions of the young people. I was very careful not to talk too much about the political, social aspects of the project around them, because it's very sensitive and difficult. We were talking about stigma. The project opened up conversations around stigma in class, And I didn't want to sit in a group of 11 and 14-year-olds and say, oh, do you understand that other parts of the city might look at you in a certain way? That wasn't, that would have taken a lot more time to gently, kind of, I don't know, find ways of exploring that just wasn't in the scope of this project. I think pride and happiness.
There's a lot of smiling going on. I think there's a slide that's called Deep, maybe.
There's something that we had hanging in the gallery, and it's a quote by a sound artist called Pauline Oliveros, who created the deep listening practice. The deep listening practice fed into what I was doing. There's a shift that I had to make, and that was seeing my background as a weakness and now seeing it as a strength. That talking about this stuff like we're doing tonight is really important and valuable. It's something, like speaking in my own voice and talking about my background is really powerful. And it took me till I was in my late 40s to understand that. And so there's probably a bit of sadness about that as well. But I can't, I'm so excited about it and infused about what the possibilities are and what the potential is. But I can't feel too sad about it because it feels powerful and important.
In a way, I felt like Neolithic Cannibals was a sort of creative reimagining of the 1932 archaeological investigation that used sound and listening to map the site. Can you tell me a bit about the role of sound and the role of listening in the exhibition of the project and why it matters?
I think I've spoken a bit about the importance of listening in my practice, and I think with Class Divide, we were really keen to, actually Curtis described the project as a bit of a Trojan horse. We're going to make this thing, we're going to put it in a gallery in the centre of the city.
We purposely chose not to put it on in Whitehawk because we wanted to make some noise and be heard in the city by audiences that might come to sound art events and experimental kind of things like that, but probably wouldn't ever step in Whitehawk, have never been to Whitehawk, to give them something of that. And I think I brought it with me because it was a really important book that I was reading when I was developing this project.
What's it? Sonic
Agency. And it really informed the way I approached the project, because this idea of amplification and activation, sounding and being heard. I talked already about how so you've got the Neolithic camp, which, as you could see from some of the photos, is hidden. It's invisible. A lot of people don't even know it's there. In fact, even though I grew up there and my mum's and nan's ashes are actually scattered on that site, I didn't know the Neolithic camp was there in that spot. I thought it was somewhere else. I had a vague notion that it was there, but I didn't know where it was. So you've got this hidden space. You've got what could be described as a hidden community that live in this valley where this hill separates them, kind of hides them away from the rest of the city. And I suppose I did frame that hill as a bit of a symbolic barrier and wondered how we might be able to use sound to sound the environment of Whitehawk, to maybe, like you say, collect sounds in a way that maybe the archaeologists were collecting artifacts. Sorry, I've got a really croaky throat now. In the gallery, I described the sound piece as an artifact, a contemporary artifact that the young people had discovered. Yeah, along with the deep listening, the ideas around how the site itself was discovered. All of these things kind of blurred together, and it was really important to me that we would just make a fucking noise.
Yeah.
We would make some noise and be heard. Actually, one of the things that was quite ambitious that I didn't get to do around sounding the environment. When I say sounding, what I mean by that is some kind of activation of something that's resonant, or, it could be the acoustics from a tower block or an estate. It could be the valley walls. I had this idea that I wanted to borrow a really big sound system, and I wanted to hook up all the synthesizers we were using and let the kids just make a load of noise. And I wasn't so interested in the sound that they were making. I was interested in what it would sound like when it bounced off the valleys, and that we would record that and we would listen to that movement of the sound around the space. And that, again, it would be another, just like, look, here we fucking are. Mm-hmm. We're making some noise. Can you hear us? Sorry about the swearing. It must be that wine kicking in. I don't know where it's come from. I'll behave myself. in the end, we couldn't afford to do the sound system, but what we did do, and in fact, there's a clip we can play in a minute. We took a speaker into the foot tunnel that runs underneath the race course. It's like quite a popular route for people to come in and out of Whitehawk. It's not very nice. I found out later that it's really, a lot of the children are quite scared of using that foot tunnel. But anyway, we took a speaker in there and loads of percussion instruments, and we made that noise. We made noise and we listened to the acoustics. And this is another really lovely moment where the young people designed their own improvisational rules. Now, to us, that's like, oh, well, improvisation, yeah, it's a thing. But for those young children to just very quickly take some post-it notes and go, okay, right, I'm going to sound my bell now. Then the next person is going to wait for the sound of that bell to die away completely before they sound theirs. They were coming up with all these ways that they could listen, not only play the sounds, but listen as well. It was lovely. There were dog walkers coming through and the dogs were just getting completely freaked out by all this racket that was going on. But it was another really, really great moment. Could we play that clip?
Just like leave it like near, not in the bush, but like close but near, and see if we can hit anybody. Okay, let's go. They can't do it anymore, but they're there, so I don't think ladybugs do make noise. I think, or maybe it is quiet.
My favourite shot. Love it. That's up on where the Neolithic site is. Yeah, magic.
Explaining is that obviously, music at school is quite codified, as you said. And never at my school, never at any schools I've come across, has there been what you're doing, which is saying sound is a currency. It's a kind of way of communicating. It's a pleasure. Hearing you talk about it, it seems like a very natural thing that all kids should be exposed to, but they just aren't at all, ever.
No, and that's not even just a class thing. It's not like, middle class or upper class kids getting this stuff daily, because of course they're not. It's just not part of our education.
A lot of the time, I think music feels like quite a technical thing to have to, like I don't play any instruments, so the idea of actually doing music in any conventional form feels like it's a barrier.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I can do is think about being playful, and it's to do the stuff that you would be doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing to take to children because it actually opens up sound as something that anyone can do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that was, again, obviously really important to kind of not have any barriers and make it accessible. In fact, now, you know, if I do field recording workshops, I just tend to use mobile phones. So there's no equipment. I don't really care. Like, it doesn't matter if the quality is not perfect. It really doesn't matter. And of course, there are times when it does matter, but for experimenting and being playful and making artwork together, the tools aren't really that important. You can just get by with some basic stuff, some percussion instruments, and you can explore all kinds of aspects of sound, like acoustics, what it means to, you know, for humans and more than humans, to how we navigate the world using our ears and how we listen to the world and each other. You know, there's a whole area of exploration out there that doesn't include instruments or, you know, equipment.
So I think my last question really is just what comes next?
Well, I've got no idea about the city as a whole. That feels like too big a question for me to answer. For me, I am just trying to work out how to survive. You know, financially, it's kind of frustrating because I know that there are lots of other people in this situation, but I feel like I've come to a point in my life where I've really worked out what the fuck I want to do. And yet I've got no way of making it sustainable. I've got no funding. You know, there's part of me that actually is interested in academia. It's a frustration I have at the moment is, well, first of all, I'll say I'm quite proud of not existing in that world. I have moments where I do have to enter into those worlds, and I definitely have my imposter syndrome around those situations, like feeling like I don't know all the words and all the language. But I also now appreciate that what I bring to it is unique and quite different because I don't have that academic background. But I often look at that, particularly in sound art, it is really, really dominated by academics. And so it's quite hard to see the amount of space and funding that I'm assuming must exist in those worlds that I can't get anywhere near. I can't access it. I'm just sort of having to watch as an outsider as that kind of sound art and listening world develops in those ways. And I'd like to be a part of that. I haven't quite worked that out, but I'm really excited. You know, I hope it comes across. I'm really infused by what I'm doing. I feel like I've spent all these years, like since I was a teenager, working out loads of technical stuff, loads of creative stuff. I unkindly describe myself as a busy idiot sometimes. And what I mean by that is I've made loads of sounds. I know how to use all the equipment. I know how to do all that stuff. I can do that really well. And now I'm engaging my brain a bit more. And of course I was before, but I'm just I'm more thoughtful and reflective about what I'm doing. And that's much more exciting to me. And in fact, a good way of explaining that right now is I do much more. I keep a listening journal, and I've been doing it for nearly 2 years. And I do much more recording in my listening journal than I do using any equipment. So I'm much more interested in writing and thinking about sound. And that's practice as well. I've always seen my writing as a weakness due to my lack of education. Like, I just wouldn't share it. Like, it would be embarrassing to share it. But now I do. I share that. My listening journal is out there if anyone wants to read it. No, it's like anything, isn't it? It's practice. So you're always developing it. And I definitely, I spend a lot of time listening to what some people might describe as a kind of nothing space, or, you know, I'll just be writing about the sounds in my house. Maybe I'll hear singing from the next door and I'll be thinking about the barriers of plaster and wallpaper and paint that are filtering that. So, you know, I'm going at that kind of level of thinking about how that changes and filters the sound. I feel like I'm just kind of flexing a muscle doing that. I enjoyed it. It's just lovely to do it. It's, sometimes I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with the listening journal. I share it. I do it as a practice. I think that actually, since I started sharing it publicly, it's taken on there's a bit of a weird energy around it, and I think what that means to me is actually the listening itself that's much more important than sharing it, than making it a thing that, like a project that I'm doing. It is just practice. What I sometimes describe as listening beyond sound, which is, where does it take? It's a window. it's a mode of inquiry. So listening for me has always made me more inquisitive. It seems to open up that kind of curious nature. And as you've just said, in this project, it was archaeology. And there were archaeology organizations that were very excited about that. Oh my God, archaeology it's like mainly old men, white men, and they're all dying off. And exactly. Yeah. Well, maybe not sexy, but it was making it, it was doing something that probably isn't happening in traditional teaching of that subject. So a kind of mode of inquiry, a window into different worlds. Listening can be all of those things.
And it's bringing in science, sort of scientific or academic areas, approaching in a completely different way, I think.
Yeah.
I'll just say this, that there was the photography director of Awesome thing. I don't quite understand why this was a finalist, and you didn't win. And there were these amazing photographs which were really, you looked at them and they had such a sort of charge, and they were photographs of the last place that family had seen people who had disappeared in various regimes. But also, that same artist had this, in the photographer's gallery, this like a little trench that you went in and stood with speakers and everything. And I've never come across anything like this in terms of sound. And it was a grave which had I think 7 family members who'd been killed under Franco. They were sort of sifting through this grave very sort of respectfully for all the remains. And it was recorded. And you just heard it, and it was incredibly moving and a very proper way of honouring these people who've been lost. And again, it's just like a completely different way of looking at the politics of something that wasn't visual and wasn't in words. And again, never way. So it's got so many elements, hasn't it? Sound.
Is there a challenge in taking sound into a gallery? Because we often think of galleries as a very visual place.
I'm new to it. That was my first. Well, no, it was my second sound exhibition in a gallery. I think there were practical issues like the shape of the room and mounting speakers, running the cable, all of that stuff that's boring, and there's usually a way to work it out. Acoustics, I mean, the acoustics of the space that we were in, the Lighthouse project space, weren't great, but I grew to love them. It's quite reverberant in there. And actually, it was more of an issue with audience members, because if people were speaking in there, the sound would just fill the whole room the moment you start talking in there. And so we just did the thing that I imagine happens in lots of galleries, that when people walked in, we whispered at them. So it gave the message that this is a quiet space right from the moment you walk in there.
Right, I've just moved down here from London, right? And so I'm not in Whitehawk, but on the edge of it anyway.
Yeah.
And so you sort of get to this town, and then you realise that actually, you're in a different town, actually. You know what I mean? You're not actually invited, and it's kind of weird,
It's a bit like that, isn't it?
You sort of come down from London, you imagine, I'd sort of spent time here before, but you come down here and you sort of imagine, there is actually two towns here, do you know what I mean? Yeah. And you're sort of very much, it's cool for me actually, I'm obviously in the right place.
Yeah.
You clearly don't think that they're of the same kind of as the people in this part of town.
That's right. I think that it is a bit separate from the rest of the city, and making jokes of different classes is a pretty, it's a common thing, and it's almost acceptable. I've definitely been in situations where I've heard terms like shite hawkers used, and when people don't know I'm from there. I touched on it earlier, when people will find out I'm from Whitehawk and be almost amazed. Surely you couldn't come from there. And then what was it like? What was this strange place like that we've only heard? And there is so much stigma around that place. We hope that we might break down some of that. We might be able to do a little bit of work to break some of that down, but there's still a lot more to do. I don't really know what the answers are. It's such a kind of historical thing that it's really hard to break it down. The fear that people feel about an area like that is real. And I also don't want to dismiss that. It's there for a reason. It needs to be heard. And I suppose, challenged.
It impacted on the children and sort of, may have sort of broadened their horizons, changed their landscape. Do you know what I mean? Because you said you went down to the Lighthouse. So obviously that may have sort of brought new experiences to them. Is there a sort of a residue of that fact that they sort of like, just that awareness that they've actually been somewhere that was actually quite different and quite new, and somehow that might mean new possibilities?
I hope so. We did some interviews with the young people afterwards. Most of them said they want to carry on doing this. They would like to carry on doing sound and working with these kinds of instruments. And as I said earlier, I'm still in touch with some of the parents, and I know some of them are still doing music projects. And I wish I could, like I said, I wish I could do more with them, because I think we only got to spend 6 sessions together. And yeah, there was a lot of talent there just in those 6 sessions. It'd be lovely to just have some open sessions where new people could come in and we could continue doing it. Maybe that might happen. Maybe that might happen this year. We'll see.
Is that sort of funding dependent? Or?
Yeah, I was definitely distracted last year because I had what felt like this amazing thing happen. A philanthropist came to the show and said, "What do you need?" And without saying, "Well, can you just fund me to be an artist?" which I wanted to say, I know I should have done. I said, "Well, it would be nice to tour this and take it to some other places." And because we only had such a short run at the festival, I'd hoped that I could put it on at Brighton Museum or Hove Museum. And I spent a lot of time dealing with all of that. It didn't happen. My philanthropist has gone cold. That's how it goes. It's fine. But it's almost in a way, it's good to sort of let go of that, because now I can start thinking about more achievable things, like potentially doing some more workshops over there, which I'd really like to do. Yeah, it'd be lovely. I can't remember what it's called. There's something like the Noise Orchestra down in Cornwall that works with young people. I'd love to just have an ongoing thing where we grow this orchestra of noise with young people in Whitehawk. It would be amazing. Maybe do a show it once a year. But yeah, I need to be funded to do that. I can't afford to volunteer. I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. Yeah, that's a possibility. But even running a GoFundMe takes a lot of work. There are some options out there that I've heard about recently that I'm going to follow up. Well, I'm just going to make an advert for my friend Ju's potluck events, because they are actually just great events for meeting up with other artists. At the point at which I started to feel comfortable calling myself an artist, even though I've made music and done all that stuff for years, potluck was a really safe space for me to go and be an artist and to feel safe doing that. So yeah, if you haven't been to potluck before, look it up and go along, because it's very good. Sorry, Ju, putting you on the spot there. But Ju runs that, and it's great.
It's been something that I've been wanting to go to, so I have been looking at it to make sure I come along.
It's really good. Just lovely people, and really good. Yeah, and feel free to get in touch as well. If you want to find me, my website is Simon Sound. Oh, it was on there, simonsound.co.uk. And I'm on Instagram as Simon Sound, yeah. And I'm on Instagram as the Simon Sound. It's on there. and I know I haven't spoken much about Class Divide tonight, but it goes without saying really that Neolithic Cannibals couldn't have happened without Class Divide on a number of levels. First of all, I'm so proud of what Curtis has done with Class Divide and the podcast and the campaign. We both have the same backgrounds, and he went out there and made this podcast. And actually, podcasts kind of doesn't quite describe what it is. It's a radio documentary series, really. And he's shared his story and the story of education in Brighton using his voice and talking about stuff in ways that I didn't think was possible for us. So he led the way with that, really, and helped and gave me the confidence to be able to do what I'm doing now. And I think even though things can't quite work out the right words to say at the moment, difficult around some of the consultation stuff that's going on around education in Brighton, it's got quite nasty and divisive in ways. I know that Class Divide are in for the long haul, and they're going to carry on campaigning to make education fairer in Brighton. They're not going anywhere. And it's not just about catchment area changes. There's a whole load of things they're doing to try and make things better and fairer.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Exploding Appendix. These sessions are recorded live in Brighton. You can be a part of them. The details are on the website, explodingappendix.com. It's also available on social media, including SoundCloud, Facebook, Instagram, and Eventbrite. Exploding Appendix, you'll find us. Cheers, and bye.